been working as a consultant for state governments, and I've looked at some of the projects which are being implemented. I just thought that sharing some of these insights might be helpful for other people as well. So the first thing is most of these project time frames range from 5 to 10 years, and the budget generally goes from 300 crore to 500 crores or even 1000 crores for some of the well recognized projects. One of the challenges with most of these projects is evaluation and how do we track they're able to meet the goals of the particular projects. So if you want to look at the type of projects, there are majorly three different types of projects. One is external aided, the second one is center sponsored, and the third one is state sponsored. And most of the times there's not a clear cut differentiation between all these three. For a single project, it could be sponsored by all three entities. So the short form that is generally used is EAP, that is like external aided projects. And some of the funding agencies that I have worked with as a consultant have been World Bank and JICA, or the Japan International Cooperation Bank. So as I mentioned, convergence is basically like where you see that there's an overlap between the goals that two or more projects, departments, or agencies are working on, and how do we bring that to how do we bring that visibility, and how can we make sure that these projects, departments, and agencies work together so that they're all working towards a single goal and there is better coordination between these two things. And like all problems, when they cross a certain scale, the challenge is how do we handle the communication and how do we handle the collaboration. And generally it starts by creating SOPs and standardizing things so that it becomes evident for everybody who is involved, like what each team, project, department is working on and how they can collaborate with each other. And two effective tools for enabling those things are SDGs and LGDs. SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals and LGD stands for Local Governance Directory. We will try to cover these two things today. So the first thing that we would like to look at is basically the LGD, or the Local Governance Directory. Anybody who has worked with data, they would be able to foresee or identify that one of the major challenges is how do we make sure that everybody is using the same state name, district name, or block name. And this is a problem that comes up in every project. So one of the things that the government of India has done well is basically the Local Governance Directory. So in Local Governance Directory, what the government has done is they have come out with codes for each of these different geographies or the hierarchies that are there. So for states, they will have like a different code. Similarly, for each of the districts and blocks that are there in different states, they have a unique code that they have come out with. So as you can see here, so this is the hierarchy that is being used. So you start from the country level and then you have state level codes, district level codes, sub-district, and village level. Sub-districts are also called as blocks in some some states. And this is all majorly for the urban side of things. Similarly, like on the rural side also, like you have the village code that comes here, or if it is an urban, it will be a different code. But the idea is that for each geography at different granularity, we have a unique code, so that identifying these individual entities across different projects become much more easier. So for any of the projects that are happening, you can look at like while the planning can happen top down, say like at the country level or the state level, one thing that you need to understand is the execution always happens on the ground. And when we say ground, we generally refer to the village or the equivalent of that. So you have country, state, district, block, and village. So most of the times it would make a lot of sense to have the clarity at the level of the village, and then other things can be basically like you have the data at the village, which can be rolled up to block level, similarly from different blocks to district, district to state, and state to country. So what LGD does is it gives you code for each one of these, and making sure that in your databases or the master data, wherever you have the list of districts where this project is implemented or list of blocks where this project is implemented, mapping them against the LGD code would make it easier not only for you, even for other projects to like connect with you, and even for the financial summaries that needs to be provided to the state, country, or the other funding agencies as well. While execution always happens at the village level. So you also need to look at like who are the beneficiaries, and for identifying the beneficiaries, having a sense of which are the households, that is like set of people living in, individuals living in a particular house, and finally the beneficiary is going to be individuals. So being able to identify up to this level makes it much more effective. It will help you answer the question who are the direct beneficiaries of a project and who are the indirect beneficiaries of a project. But at the same time, if you're working on data, making sure that the details of these households and individuals should never be exposed to the public. So generally trying to get all of this summary at the village level and then rolling them up makes a good sense. So this is majorly about the local governance directory. We will get into the details of this in a later video. So this kind of like takes care of standardization from the geography perspective at different granularities. So while, like I mentioned, the execution starts from bottom up, planning generally also needs to happen sometimes at the top level also. So while we can have community based planning, which makes more effective for a particular village, we need to look at like what are the commonalities, and for that starting from somewhere at the top also makes a lot of sense, and that is where SDGs or sustainable development goals make a lot of sense. So SDGs, if you look at it, there are 17 different goals that have been identified, which are independent of the country. Think of it more from the human perspective, like what are the problems that we should solve as a world. So as you can see here, there are 17 different goals, starting with no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, clean water and sanitation, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions. 17 is partnership for achieving all of these goals. So having a sense of all of these 17 goals for everybody who is working on government projects and projects which are working towards betterment of people makes it easier for different people to communicate, because all of them can look at like what are the goals of their particular project and how are those goals mapped to different SDGs that are there, so that it becomes easier for people to identify what are the different places or different opportunities for convergence or where they can work together. So now for example, let us say that there are two organizations which are working towards no poverty. Then it once you start once both these organizations map them their goals against the SDGs, then it becomes easier for us to identify, where even if it's a normal conversation, they can say that we have 13 goals that we are working towards no poverty, and then it becomes easier for these people to like identify similar minded people, organizations, and then start working with them. So we'll just like quickly go through that. As you can see here in the SDG framework, we discussed the 17 goals that are there, and these broad goals are also broken down into different targets. So each goal has different targets, and in total there are like 169 targets that have been identified. So once you identify that two teams have some convergence at the goal level, then it makes more sense to look at like what are the individual targets in that particular goal, and to see if each of them is working towards their they have common targets that they're working on. So if they're working on common targets, then it becomes better because we know that there's a lot of overlap there. And once they know that the targets are also same, then they can start looking at different indicators that are there in the project also. So you can look at it like goals is like what we want to achieve in total. Targets is something which we can keep calculating on a regular basis at a smaller granularity. Indicators is these are like most of the times indicators or ratios, so that like you get a better sense of what these indicators are and you can compare them across different geographies. So it's numerator and denominator. For each of these indicator, identifying what is the numerator, what is the denominator, and what is the data from which we should be fetching this numerator and denominator also makes sense. And then once this happens, it also becomes easier for you to align your project goals, targets and indicators also along with the SDG. So once you have this data, like we discussed, it becomes easier to communicate with different stakeholders. And as you can see, though SDG has been defined at the country level, they also have something called as LIF or the local indicator framework. Whatever we discussed here, this is majorly, you can consider that this is at the global level indicator framework. And similarly, at each of these geographical granularity. So at the country level, you have something called as CIF or country indicator framework, because for a particular country one indicator might make sense but it may not make sense for the other country. So countries have an option to like make changes and do overrides at the CIF level, but they will take the responsibility of mapping those indicators to the SDG indicators so that it becomes easier to map them. Similarly, at the state level you have SIF or the state indicator framework, and district level you have DIF or district indicator framework, and you can go up to the block level or even to the village level. But at village level some of these global indicator framework may not sense, so you can either pick and choose like what makes sense. So out of all of these 169 targets, you could probably pick 50 indicators at the village level, 100 at block level, and 150 at district level, and so on. But what is important is every level should make sure that they connect it to the indicator framework that is above them, and also they connect it to the indicator framework that is below them. This way it becomes easier for anybody to propagate the data. So once you have a sense of all of these things, it becomes easier for us to start looking at how the progress is happening, like are we in the right direction, should we do any changes, should we collaborate with more people, how can we source the funds that are required for effective implementation of the project. All of these things we will be able to like figure out in a better way based on these data. This is like a high level primer. We will be going into the details of each one of these and how different states, countries, or districts or blocks are making use of this data, and what is the role of data in identifying these indicators. We will look at like each of these things as we go forward in future.